Hi, I'm Rachel. I thought marriage meant loyalty, honesty, and building a life together. Instead, after 7 years of supporting my husband's dreams and sacrificing my own career, his mistress called me at 2 a.m. to tell me I was the other woman in their relationship. No apology, no explanation, just a cold, venomous voice telling me to back off from her man. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. I had put him through law school. I had worked double shifts to pay our mortgage while he studied. I had postponed having children so he could focus on his career. I had turned down job offers in other cities to keep our life stable. And somehow, in this twisted narrative she was spinning, I was the homewrecker. But the worst part wasn't discovering the affair. It wasn't even being called the other woman in my own marriage. It was realizing that my husband had been feeding her lies about our relationship for months, painting me as some obsessive ex who wouldn't let go. And when I finally decided to fight back with the truth, they both tried to gaslight me into believing I was losing my mind. The rain drummed against the windows of our Maplewood home as I sat in the darkness of our living room, my phone still warm from that devastating call. The red numbers on the microwave clock glowed accusingly, 2:17 a.m. In 17 minutes, my entire world had crumbled, rebuilt itself, and crumbled again. Her name was Zoe, 26 years old, a paralegal at my husband David's law firm. She spoke with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards, her voice syrupy with false concern. "Rachel, honey, I think you need to know the truth. David and I have been together for 8 months now. He's been trying to figure out how to tell you, but honestly, you're making it really hard by being so clingy." Clingy. The word echoed in my head like a slap. I had been clingy by cooking his favorite meals when he worked late, clingy by doing his laundry and managing our household while he built his career, clingy by believing him when he said those late nights at the office were about landing the Morrison case, not landing his colleague. "He told me how you won't give him space," Zoe continued, her tone growing sharper, "how you check his phone and get jealous when he talks to other women. It's really unhealthy, Rachel. He's been staying at my place most nights because he needs a break from your intensity." My intensity, I almost laughed. The intensity of supporting someone through 3 years of law school while working 60-hour weeks as a nurse. The intensity of believing in us when he doubted himself during the bar exam. The intensity of celebrating his first case victory while secretly crying in the bathroom because we'd had to postpone starting a family again. "David says you two have been having problems for years, that you're more like roommates than a married couple. He wants to be with someone who inspires him, who believes in his dreams, someone young enough to actually give him the family he wants." That last line hit like a physical blow. We had been trying for a baby for 2 years. Every negative pregnancy test was a shared heartbreak, or so I thought. Apparently, while I was mourning our failed attempts at creating life together, he was creating a new life with someone else. "Look, I'm not trying to be cruel," Zoe said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just being honest. David loves me. We're planning a future together. It would be easier for everyone if you could just let go. Maybe find someone more your speed. Someone settled, you know?" Someone my speed. At 32, apparently I was already being put out to pasture by a woman who probably couldn't remember a time before social media. Someone settled, as if 7 years of marriage, of building a life together, of sacrifice and compromise and shared dreams could be dismissed with such casual cruelty. But what struck me most wasn't her words. It was the details she knew. The way I organized David's case files by color, how I always made sure his coffee was ready before he left for work, the name of our couple's therapist from 2 years ago when we had a rough patch. These weren't things you learned from pillow talk. These were intimate details of a life shared, details that David had been feeding her like ammunition. He's going to ask for a divorce next week, Zoe concluded, her voice now matter-of-fact, businesslike. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I feel bad for you. You seem like a nice woman, just misguided about what you meant to him. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting in the dark with the phone pressed against my ear, listening to the dial tone like it might offer some explanation for what had just happened.
For the first hour, I sat motionless, processing the conversation in fragments. The casual cruelty of her tone, the practiced way she delivered each blow, the intimate knowledge of my marriage that could only have come from David himself. This wasn't a confession call. It was a warning shot, a declaration of war disguised as mercy. As the initial shock wore off, something else began to surface. Not just hurt, not just betrayal, but a cold, crystalline anger. She had called me the other woman. In my own home, wearing the wedding ring I had helped pay for, she had positioned me as the interloper in my own life. But more than that, she had revealed something crucial. They weren't just having an affair. They were building a narrative where I was the villain, the obstacle to their happiness, the crazy wife who couldn't let go. David wasn't just cheating on me, he was systematically erasing me, rewriting our history to justify his betrayal. I walked through our house in the pre-dawn darkness, seeing it with new eyes. The law books I had bought him, still carefully arranged on his desk. The framed photo from our wedding day, tucked strategically behind a lamp where it wouldn't be immediately visible to visitors. The empty nursery we had optimistically painted yellow 2 years ago, now serving as David's home office. Every corner held evidence of a life I had built, funded, and maintained while he pursued his dreams. But according to their story, I was just some delusional woman who wouldn't accept that it was over. As the sun began to rise over Maplewood, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I made a decision. If Zoe wanted to play the role of the innocent other woman being harassed by a crazy wife, she was welcome to it. But she was about to learn that this particular crazy wife had been keeping very detailed records of exactly who had been paying for what in this marriage. And David was about to discover that rewriting history only works when the other person doesn't have receipts. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you. So if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. Before we dive into what happened next, I have to ask, have you ever been gaslighted so hard that someone tried to convince you that you were the villain in your own story? Have you ever had someone rewrite your reality so completely that you started questioning your own memories? Maybe it was a friend who borrowed money and then accused you of being controlling when you asked for it back. Maybe it was a family member who took credit for your achievements and then called you ungrateful when you spoke up. Or maybe, like me, it was someone who was supposed to love and protect you, but instead fed lies about you to justify their betrayal. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time someone tried to make you feel crazy for standing up for yourself. Share your story, because we need to remind each other that we're not alone in this. We need to validate each other's experiences when the world tries to tell us we're overreacting, being dramatic, or remembering things wrong. And if you're going through something like this right now, if someone is trying to rewrite your story to make themselves the hero, stick around. Because sometimes you don't just survive being called the other woman in your own marriage. You gather evidence, expose the lies, and watch their carefully constructed narrative crumble into dust. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's proving that you were right all along. David walked through the front door at exactly 6:47 p.m., just like he had every Tuesday for the past 3 months. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly mussed in that way that suggested he'd run his fingers through it during a stressful day. He dropped his briefcase by the stairs with the same casual thud, called out, "Hey babe, I'm home," in that tired but affectionate tone that I had grown to cherish, and headed straight for the kitchen where the smell of his favorite lasagna filled the air. Everything was exactly as it had been every Tuesday for months, except this Tuesday, I knew where he had really been. "How was your day?" I asked, stirring the sauce with deliberate calm, my back to him as he loosened his tie completely and hung it over the back of his chair. The same chair where he'd sat countless mornings, drinking the coffee I made him while reviewing case files for trials that I now realized probably didn't exist. "Exhausting," he said, and I could hear the genuine fatigue in his voice. "The Morrison case is killing me. We're so close to a breakthrough, but opposing counsel keeps throwing up roadblocks. I might have to work late again tomorrow." The Morrison case. I'd heard about the Morrison case for 8 months now. The complex litigation that required late nights, weekend research sessions, and frequent strategy meetings with his legal team. The case that had slowly but steadily pulled him away from our dinner table, our weekend plans, our bed. I turned around, holding the wooden spoon, and really looked at him. Same David I had married 7 years ago. Same crooked smile that had made me weak in the knees when we met at that coffee shop near the university. Same green eyes that had promised me forever during our vows. Same hands that had held mine through his father's funeral, through my miscarriages, through every triumph and disappointment we had shared. But as I studied his face, I began to notice things I had been too trusting to see before. The way his eyes didn't quite meet mine when he talked about work. The slight tension in his jaw when I asked specific questions about his cases. The practiced ease with which he delivered explanations that sounded detailed but actually revealed nothing concrete. "Tell me about this breakthrough," I said, setting down the spoon and leaning against the counter. "What kind of roadblocks?" For just a moment, something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "It's complicated, Ratch. You know how legal stuff is. Boring procedural things." He opened the refrigerator and grabbed a beer, twisting off the cap with more force than necessary. "I don't want to bore you with the details." Bore me? For 7 years, I had listened to every detail of every case, every client meeting, every courtroom victory and defeat. I had celebrated with him when he won his first trial. I had stayed up until 2 a.m. helping him prepare opening statements. I had learned legal terminology just so I could understand his world better. And now, suddenly, he didn't want to bore me? "I don't mind," I pressed gently. "You know I like hearing about your work." He took a long drink of his beer, buying time. "It's just discovery disputes. Nothing interesting. The opposing counsel is being deliberately obstructive about document production." The words came out smooth, practiced, like he had rehearsed them. Discovery disputes, document production, legal terms that sounded authoritative but told me absolutely nothing. I realized that for months, maybe longer, his explanations had been getting increasingly vague, filled with impressive-sounding jargon that actually conveyed no real information. "Who's the opposing counsel?" I asked, cutting the lasagna into neat squares, my movements precise and controlled. Another pause, another long sip of beer. "Patricia Hendricks. She's known for being difficult." Patricia Hendricks. I filed the name away, adding it to the growing list of details I would be checking later. Because by now, standing in our kitchen, watching my husband lie to my face with such practiced ease, I had accepted a truth that part of me had been denying since Zoe's call. This wasn't a recent affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a systematic deception that had been going on for months, possibly longer. The late nights, the weekend work sessions, the mysterious phone calls he took in his study with the door closed, none of it had been about the Morrison case. How much longer do you think the case will take? I asked, plating his dinner with the same care I had shown every night for 7 years. Hard to say, could be months. These things drag on forever. He sat down at the table, and I noticed how he positioned himself so he could see his phone screen if it lit up. I'm just grateful the firm is letting me take the lead on it. This could really make my career. Make his career. The same phrase he had used about 3 different cases over the past 2 years. Always the case that would change everything, that would justify the long hours and missed dinners and canceled weekend plans. The case that would finally allow us to start the family we had been planning, to buy the bigger house we had been saving for, to take the vacation to Italy we had been dreaming about. I set his plate in front of him and sat down across the table, watching as he cut into the lasagna with appreciation. "This looks amazing, babe. You always know exactly what I need after a long day." The compliment should have warmed me. For 7 years, it would have. But tonight, it felt hollow, performative, like he was reading from a script titled, "How to Be a Good Husband Coming Home from Work." "David," I said quietly, "do you ever think about what we're building together, where we want to be in 5 years? He looked up from his plate, slightly startled by the shift in conversation. "Why?" "I just feel like we've been in this holding pattern lately, waiting for your career to settle, waiting for the right time to have kids, waiting to really start our life. Sometimes I wonder if we're missing the life we already have." It was a genuine moment of vulnerability, a real attempt to connect with my husband about the future I thought we were building together. I watched his face carefully, looking for the man I had married, the one who used to stay up until dawn talking about our dreams and plans. Instead, I saw calculation, a brief moment where he seemed to be weighing his words, deciding what version of himself to present to me. "I know it's been hard, Ratch. All the long hours, all the time apart, but it's temporary. Once this case wraps up, once I make partner, things will be different. We'll have the security to really focus on us, on starting our family." The security to focus on us. I almost laughed at the irony. While I had been working double shifts to provide security for us, he had been providing security for someone else entirely. "When do you think that will be? Specifically?" Specifically? He seemed thrown by the question. "I don't know, babe. 6 months? A year? These things don't follow a set timeline." 6 months to a year. Enough time for him to figure out how to leave me for Zoe while protecting his assets. Enough time to build his narrative of the failed marriage, the wife who couldn't understand his ambitions, the woman who was holding him back from his true happiness. We finished dinner in relative quiet, with David scrolling through his phone between bites. Twice, he smiled slightly at something on the screen before quickly switching to a neutral expression. Each time, he glanced up to see if I had noticed, but I kept my attention focused on my own plate, giving him no indication that I was watching every micro-expression, cataloging every tell. After dinner, he retreated to a study to review some documents for tomorrow's depositions. I did the dishes, listening to the low murmur of his voice through the closed door. He was on the phone, but his tone was too soft for me to make out words, too intimate for a business call, too careful for a conversation he wanted me to overhear. As I dried the last plate, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the trusting wife who took her husband's word at face value. I was done being the woman who made excuses for inconsistencies and gaps in his stories. Tomorrow, while David was at his depositions, I was going to start gathering evidence. Not because I wanted to catch him in a lie, I already knew he was lying. But because when this all came crashing down, when Zoe's version of events was pitted against mine, I wanted to have more than just my word and my intuition. I wanted proof, cold, hard, undeniable proof of exactly who had been lying to whom. Because if David and Zoe wanted to paint me as the delusional wife who couldn't accept reality, they were about to learn that reality has a way of fighting back. The next morning, I watched David follow his usual routine with new eyes.
Coffee at 6:15, shower at 6:30, dressed and out the door by 7:45, with a kiss on my cheek and a promise to call me later. Long day ahead, he said, grabbing his briefcase. Might be late again tonight. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner before I moved into action. First stop, his study. The room that had become increasingly off-limits over the past 8 months, always locked when he wasn't home, always accompanied by explanations about client confidentiality and sensitive documents. But David had forgotten one crucial detail in his haste to leave this morning. He'd left his personal laptop charger plugged into the wall. His personal laptop, the one he claimed never left the office, had clearly been here recently. I searched methodically, starting with his desk drawers. Bills, old case files, business cards. Nothing unusual until I found a credit card statement I had never seen before. A Chase Sapphire card in David's name, opened 8 months ago, with charges that made my blood run cold. Dinner at Chez Laurent, the French restaurant downtown where we'd celebrated our anniversary 3 years ago. $247 for 2 people on a Tuesday night in March. I had been working a double shift at the hospital that night, covering for a colleague with food poisoning. Flowers from Petals and Stems, the expensive florist on 5th Street. $156 on Valentine's Day. I remembered that Valentine's Day clearly. David had apologized profusely for forgetting, explaining that work had been overwhelming. He'd promised to make it up to me the following weekend. Hotel charges. The Grand View Suites, our city's most romantic hotel, the one with the panoramic views and champagne service. Multiple charges over 6 months, always on nights when David claimed to be working late on depositions or strategy sessions. Weekend charges when he told me he was attending continuing education seminars in Columbus. My hands shook as I photographed each page with my phone. This wasn't just an affair, it was a parallel relationship, complete with romantic dinners, flowers, and hotel charges that had been funded by a secret credit card while I worked overtime to pay our mortgage. But the credit card statement was just the beginning. Hidden behind his law school diploma, I found a small key I'd never seen before. It took me 20 minutes of systematic searching to find what it opened, a locked drawer in his filing cabinet that I'd always assumed contained client files. Inside were printed emails, dozens of them, dating back 10 months, all between David and Zoe. I sat on the floor of his study, reading a love story that had been unfolding parallel to my marriage, and felt my heart break in ways I didn't know were possible. My darling Z, one email from David began, "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about the way you looked in that blue dress, the one you wore to dinner at Marco's. You're everything I've been missing in my life. Passionate, spontaneous, alive. Rachel has become so predictable, so focused on practical things like bills and schedules. She doesn't understand that I need inspiration, not just stability."
Predictable. Practical. The words stung like physical blows. I had been predictable in my loyalty, practical in my support of his dreams. While I was being the reliable wife who kept our life running smoothly, he was seeking inspiration in the arms of a 26-year-old paralegal. Another email, dated 2 months ago. "I've been thinking about what you said about starting fresh somewhere new. Maybe California, like we talked about. I've been consulting with a divorce attorney. Discreetly, of course. He says if I can prove that Rachel and I have been essentially living separate lives, that she's been emotionally unavailable, it could help with the asset division. The house is mostly in my name since I was the primary earner when we bought it. We could have our new beginning sooner than we thought." Primary earner. I had to read that sentence 3 times before its full impact hit me. Yes, technically David's salary was higher than mine. Now. But he'd conveniently forgotten the 3 years when I was the only one earning anything while he was in law school. He'd forgotten the years of my overtime shifts that paid for his bar exam fees, his interview suits, his student loan payments.
And now he was planning to use those same years of sacrifice against me in divorce proceedings, painting me as financially dependent while erasing the foundation I had provided for his success. The worst email was dated just 2 weeks ago. Rachel called the office today, asking about the Morrison case. I think she's getting suspicious. Maybe it's time to start laying the groundwork for the separation. I could start staying late more often, maybe even sleep at the office a few nights. Create some distance. My lawyer says documentation of marital breakdown is important. The more evidence I have that our marriage was already over before I met you, the better. Evidence that our marriage was already over. He was creating a paper trail of our relationship's demise while I was still believing we were working through a rough patch. Every late night I had attributed to his dedication to work was actually him building a case against our marriage. But Zoe's responses revealed the true scope of their deception. She wasn't just a naive young woman who had fallen for a married man. She was an active participant in dismantling my life. I did some research on Rachel, one of her emails read. She's been working a lot of overtime lately. The hospital posts shift schedules online for their nursing staff. If you want to establish that you two barely see each other, this could help. Also, I noticed she's been taking some evening classes for her nurse practitioner certification. You could frame that as for prioritizing her career over your marriage. They had been researching me, studying my schedule, my commitments, my goals, and twisting them into evidence of marital neglect. My dedication to advancing my career, something David had always claimed to support, was being weaponized against me. Another email from Zoe, dated 3 weeks ago. About the phone call idea we discussed, I think I should do it soon. If Rachel thinks she discovered the affair on her own, she'll be too emotional to think strategically. Plus, if I position it right, I can make her seem like the unstable one. Women who've been cheated on often get angry and do things that make them look bad in divorce proceedings. We just need to provoke the right response. The phone call. That devastating 2 a.m. call that had shattered my world hadn't been a spontaneous confession or a jealous outburst. It had been a calculated move designed to destabilize me emotionally and legally. They had planned it, rehearsed it, probably, crafted every cruel word to maximum impact, designed to make me feel crazy, desperate, and out of control. The goal wasn't just to hurt me, it was to make me hurt myself through my reaction. I photographed every email, every credit card statement, every piece of evidence that revealed the true scope of their betrayal. But the final piece of the puzzle was hidden in a folder marked Legal Documents. Inside was a draft of divorce papers already partially filled out, dated for next month. David wasn't planning to ask for a divorce next week, as Zoe had told me. He was planning to file next month, after establishing enough evidence of our marital breakdown. The papers painted a picture of a marriage destroyed by my emotional unavailability, my focus on my career over our relationship, and my inability to support his professional ambitions. According to these documents, I was the one who had checked out of the marriage, leaving David no choice but to seek happiness elsewhere. But the most chilling part was the asset division proposal. The house would go to David as the primary financial contributor. The savings account we had built together would be split, but not equally. David would receive 70% because my contributions had been primarily through domestic services rather than financial investment. My retirement account, built through years of overtime shifts, would remain mine, but David would seek alimony due to the lifestyle disruption caused by my abandonment of the marriage. They had planned to take everything. Not just my husband, not just my marriage, but my financial security, my home, and my reputation. And they had been systematically building a case to justify it all. I sat in that study for 2 hours, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy I never could have imagined. But as the shock wore off, it was replaced by something else. Not just anger, though that was certainly there. Not just hurt, Though the pain was overwhelming, it was clarity.
For months, I had been questioning myself, wondering what I had done wrong, how I could fix our marriage, why I felt like I was losing my mind. Now I knew the truth. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being systematically gaslit by two people who had turned destroying my life into a collaborative project. But they had made one crucial mistake. In their arrogance, in their certainty that I was too trusting and too naive to discover their plan, they had documented everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every calculated move. They had built their case against me methodically and carefully. Now it was time for me to build mine against them. That evening, I sat in my car in the parking lot of Riverside Park, staring at my phone screen filled with photographs of evidence that could destroy 2 lives. The setting sun cast long shadows across the empty playground, and the silence felt heavy with the weight of the decision I had to make. For the first time in 48 hours, I was completely alone with the truth. No David spinning elaborate lies about depositions and discovery disputes. No Zoe's venomous voice telling me I was the other woman in my own marriage. Just me, the evidence, and a choice that would determine the course of my life. I scrolled through the photos again, each image a fresh cut. The credit card charges for romantic dinners while I worked double shifts, the emails planning my emotional destruction, the draft divorce papers designed to leave me with nothing. 10 months of systematic betrayal, documented in their own words. My first instinct was to drive straight to David's office and confront him with everything, to throw the printed emails in his face and watch him scramble for explanations, to call Zoe and tell her exactly what I thought of her research into my life. The anger burning in my chest demanded immediate satisfaction, immediate justice. But as I sat there, something my mother had told me years ago echoed in my mind. Rachel, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. And when you decide to respond, make sure you're thinking 10 steps ahead, not just reacting to the last move they made. David and Zoe had been thinking 10 steps ahead for months. Every move had been calculated, every conversation designed to position me as the unstable, clinging wife who couldn't accept reality. If I stormed in now, emotional and accusatory, I would be playing right into the narrative they had already constructed. I needed to be smarter than that. I pulled out a notebook and began writing, organizing my thoughts with the same methodical approach I used for complex patient cases at the hospital. First, I listed what they thought they knew about me, that I was naive, trusting, and reactive, that I would crumble under pressure and make emotional decisions that would work against me legally. Then I listed what they didn't know, that I had found their evidence, that I understood the full scope of their plan, that I had 7 years of my own documentation about our finances, our marriage, and David's character. Most importantly, that I had learned something crucial from watching them operate. The best revenge isn't emotional, it's methodical. I drove home and spent the next 3 hours in our spare bedroom, the one David never entered because he claimed it reminded him of our failed attempts to start a family. Surrounded by boxes of old tax returns, bank statements, and financial records, I began building my own case. The picture that emerged was nothing like the story David planned to tell in divorce court. Yes, he made more money now, but that was only possible because I had supported him financially through law school. I found the receipts for his bar exam fees, paid with my credit card, the records of student loan payments I had made from my checking account, the proof that I had covered our mortgage and utilities for 3 full years while he studied. More damaging to his narrative was the evidence of his character. Emails I had saved from his law school years where he thanked me profusely for my sacrifices and promised to make it all worth it once he was earning. Love letters he had written during our engagement describing me as his rock and his inspiration. Photos from events where he had publicly credited me with his success. But the real ammunition came from cross-referencing his secret credit card statements with his work calendar and our joint calendar.
Every romantic dinner with Zoe corresponded to a night when he had told me he was working late on the Morrison case. Every hotel charge matched up with a weekend continuing education seminar or client emergency. The Morrison case itself was the smoking gun. I called the courthouse and requested public records for any case involving a Morrison and David's law firm. There was no Morrison case. There never had been. The elaborate legal drama that had been consuming his life for 8 months existed only in his lies to me.
This was the work of someone who had done this before. I pulled out our old photo albums, looking at our 7-year marriage with new eyes. That work emergency that had caused him to miss my birthday 3 years ago, the client dinner that had run until 2 a.m. on our anniversary, the bar association conference that had kept him away the weekend my father had his heart attack. How many of these emergencies had been real? How many times had I made excuses for him, covered for him, believed his elaborate explanations because I trusted the man I had married? I found my old journals, the ones I had kept during what I now realized had been his previous affair. Yes, there had been others. The patterns were all there. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the sudden interest in his appearance, the emotional distance disguised as work stress. But this time was different. This time, he had found someone willing to help him destroy me systematically. Someone young enough to be impressed by his manipulation and strategic enough to help him execute it. I closed my journals and sat back, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't about love or passion or finding his soulmate. This was about David's need to always have an exit strategy, to always have someone new waiting in the wings while he extracted maximum benefit from his current situation. I had been his financial support system during law school, his emotional support during his early career struggles, and his domestic support as he built his practice. Now that he was established and successful, I had served my purpose. Zoe represented his next phase, young, ambitious, ready to start the family he claimed to want with someone who hadn't seen him at his lowest points. But he wanted to leave our marriage as the victim, not the villain. Hence the elaborate psychological manipulation, the systematic gaslighting, the careful construction of evidence that would paint me as the problem. I thought about Zoe's phone call again. Hearing it with new understanding, she hadn't called to confess or to clear her conscience. She had called to execute a specific strategy designed to make me react emotionally and damage my own credibility. They wanted the crazy ex-wife. They wanted the woman who couldn't let go, who made scenes, who proved their point about my instability. The realization crystallized into a cold, clear plan. I wasn't going to give them the crazy ex-wife. I was going to give them something they never saw coming. A woman who had been documenting everything, who understood exactly what they had been doing, and who was about to flip their entire strategy against them. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Jennifer Walsh, the best divorce attorney in the city. I had met her at a hospital fundraiser 2 years ago, and she had given me her card after we'd discussed the financial challenges facing single professional women. I never thought I'd need this, I had told her then, tucking her card into my wallet. Smart women prepare for possibilities they hope they'll never face, she had replied. It was time to make that call. But first, I had one more piece of evidence to collect. I opened my laptop and began researching everything I could find about Zoe Mitchell. Her social media accounts, her employment history, her educational background. What I found made me smile for the first time in days. Zoe wasn't just any paralegal. She was a paralegal who had been fired from her previous job for having an affair with a married partner. Her LinkedIn profile conveniently omitted the 6-month gap in employment that corresponded exactly to the timeline of a very public scandal at Henderson & Associates. She had done this before, too. David thought he was playing chess, moving pieces strategically across the board toward his predetermined victory. But he had made one fatal error in judgment.
He had chosen a partner who left digital footprints everywhere she went, and I was about to follow every single one of them. Jennifer Walsh's office was everything I had expected from Maplewood's most successful divorce attorney. Floor-to-ceiling law books, diplomas from prestigious universities, and a view of the courthouse that suggested she spent a lot of time winning battles there. But what struck me most was her demeanor as I spread my evidence across her mahogany conference table. She didn't gasp at the credit card statements or shake her head in sympathy at the emails. She simply put on her reading glasses and began examining each document with the clinical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. "How long have you known?" she asked after 20 minutes of silent review. "3 days," I replied. She looked up, her eyebrows raised slightly. "And in 3 days you've compiled all of this?" I nodded, watching as she flipped through the printed emails again. "I'm very thorough when I need to be." "I can see that." She set down the papers and leaned back in her chair. "Rachel, I've been practicing family law for 15 years, and I can count on one hand the number of clients who have walked into my office this prepared. Most people come in emotional, with fragments of evidence and a lot of suspicions. You've brought me a complete case file."
She pulled out a yellow legal pad and began making notes. "Let's start with what they think they have on you. According to these draft papers, David plans to argue that you've been emotionally unavailable, focused on your career to the detriment of your marriage, and essentially living separate lives. Classic strategy for someone trying to justify adultery while minimizing financial consequences." "But that's not what happened," I said. "I know. Because you have evidence showing what actually happened." She tapped the stack of financial records I'd brought. "You supported him through law school, both financially and emotionally. You've been the primary contributor to household stability while he built his career, and you have documentation proving that his work emergencies were fabricated to cover his affair." She pulled out one of the printed emails. "This is particularly damaging for them. Zoe explicitly states that they researched your schedule and plan to use your career advancement against you. That's not an affair, Rachel. That's a conspiracy to defraud you in divorce proceedings." The word conspiracy hung in the air between us. I had been thinking of this as betrayal, as adultery, as emotional abuse. But Jennifer was right. This was fraud. Financial fraud, emotional fraud, legal fraud. "What are my options?" I asked. Jennifer smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Oh, you have options. The question is how aggressively you want to pursue them." She spent the next hour outlining a strategy that was both elegant and ruthless. First, we would file for divorce before he had a chance to, using his own draft papers against him to show premeditation. Second, we would demand a full forensic accounting of his finances, including the secret credit card and any other hidden assets. Third, we would seek full disclosure of his employment records to prove that the Morrison case, his justification for months of deception, had never existed. But the real leverage, Jennifer said, comes from Zoe's employment situation. She had done her own research after I'd called to schedule the appointment. Zoe's termination from Henderson and Associates hadn't been quiet or amicable. She had been involved in a sexual harassment scandal that had cost the firm 2 major clients and resulted in a settlement payment to another paralegal who had been demoted to make room for Zoe's advancement. David's firm has very strict policies about workplace relationships, especially involving married partners. If we can prove that this affair began while they were working together and that David used his position to influence her career advancement, we have grounds for a complaint to the State Bar Association. The State Bar? I hadn't considered that David's professional license could be at risk. But as Jennifer laid out the implications, I realized that his career, the very thing he had been protecting by trying to destroy me quietly, was actually the most vulnerable part of his life. "There's something else," Jennifer said, pulling out her laptop. "I did some digging into their timeline. According to the email dates you provided, their relationship began approximately 10 months ago, but Zoe was hired at David's firm 11 months ago." The implication hit me immediately. He was involved in hiring her? More than that,
I called a contact at his firm. David was the supervising partner who conducted her final interview and made the hiring recommendation. He had access to her employment history, including the circumstances of her departure from Henderson and Associates. So he knew about her previous affair with a married partner when he hired her, and chose to hire her anyway, despite her history and despite being married himself. Make another note. That suggests premeditation at a level that goes beyond simple adultery. I sat back in my chair, processing the full scope of what we were uncovering. This wasn't a case of two people falling in love and making bad choices. This was David deliberately seeking out someone with a history of inappropriate workplace relationships and engineering a situation where they would work closely together. How long will this take? I asked. It depends on how cooperative they want to be. If David thinks he can still control the narrative, he might try to fight it out in court. But once we start deposing witnesses at his firm, once we subpoena Zoe's employment records from her previous job, once we make it clear that we have documentation of their conspiracy, she shrugged. Most people become very reasonable when they realize they're facing professional and legal consequences. I left Jennifer's office with a timeline and a battle plan. Step 1 was already in motion. She would file the divorce papers by the end of the week, citing adultery with specific evidence. Step 2 would be serving David with a demand for full financial disclosure, including explanations for every charge on his secret credit card. Step 3 would be deposing key witnesses at his law firm, particularly anyone who had worked on the fictitious Morrison case. But I had my own step to take first. That evening, I waited until David came home with his usual story about a difficult day with opposing counsel. I listened to him lie about depositions that didn't exist and strategy sessions that were actually romantic dinners. I nodded sympathetically when he complained about the stress of carrying such a complex case. And then, as he settled into his study to review documents, I made a phone call. "Zoe," I said when she answered, "this is Rachel. I think we need to talk."
The silence on the other end of the line stretched for almost 10 seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all the confident cruelty of our first conversation.
What do you want to talk about?"
"I want to give you a chance to correct some misunderstandings," I said, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. "See, I've learned some interesting things over the past few days. About the Morrison case that doesn't exist, about your employment history, about the timeline of your relationship with my husband." Another long pause. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you and David have been very thorough in your planning. I have to admire the attention to detail, really. The fake case files, the coordinated stories, the research into my schedule. It's impressive work." I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. "Rachel, I think you're confused. Maybe you should talk to someone. Get some help." "Oh, I am getting help. I'm getting legal help. Professional help. The kind of help that involves forensic accountants and private investigators and complaints to the State Bar Association." The silence stopped entirely. "Here's what I'm thinking, Zoe. You're young, you're early in your career, and you made some bad choices. But David is a 40-year-old attorney who deliberately hired someone with your employment history, who systematically planned to defraud his wife in divorce proceedings, who created an elaborate fiction to cover his tracks. Between the two of you, who do you think a jury is going to see as the mastermind?" "You can't prove anything," she said, but her voice was shaking now. "Actually, I can prove everything. I have the emails, Zoe. All of them. The ones where you researched my schedule. The ones where you planned the phone call. The ones where you discussed manipulating me into reacting emotionally so I'd look unstable in court." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "I also have David's credit card statements showing every dinner, every hotel room, every flower delivery. I have proof that the Morrison case never existed, and I have documentation of your previous affair with a married partner, which means this is a pattern of behavior for you." "What do you want?" she whispered. "I want the truth. All of it."
on the record. And I want you to understand something very clearly. David has been playing both of us. You think he's going to leave me for you, but look at the timeline. He started planning this divorce before he even hired you. You're not his future, Zoe. You're his exit strategy. I hung up before she could respond, knowing that I had planted seeds that would grow into doubt, paranoia, and eventually self-preservation. Because if there was one thing I had learned from studying their emails, it was that conspiracies only work when all parties trust each other completely. And I had just introduced a very large element of doubt into their perfect plan. The next 48 hours passed in a carefully orchestrated symphony of revelations, each one designed to dismantle the fiction that David and Zoe had spent months constructing. It started with my phone call to David's law firm. Morrison & Associates, the receptionist answered cheerfully. Hi, this is Rachel, David's wife. I'm planning a surprise dinner for him to celebrate the resolution of the Morrison case, but I want to make sure I have the timing right. Could you tell me when the final depositions are scheduled? A pause. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hartwell, but I don't show any Morrison case on Mr. Hartwell's docket. Are you sure that's the right case name? Oh, maybe I misunderstood. It's the big litigation case he's been working on for the past 8 months. The one with all the late nights and weekend depositions. Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Hartwell, I've been Mr. Hartwell's assistant for 2 years. He hasn't had any cases requiring evening or weekend depositions in at least 6 months. Most of his current caseload involves contract reviews and corporate consultations, nothing that would require late nights. I thanked her and hung up, adding her statement to my growing collection of evidence. But that was just the beginning. My next call was to the Human Resources Department at Henderson & Associates, Zoe's previous employer. I'm conducting a background verification for a potential hire. Zoe Mitchell worked for your firm until last year. I'm particularly interested in the circumstances of her departure. I can confirm dates of employment, but I can't discuss the specifics of her departure due to confidentiality agreements. I understand, but if she were applying for a position that required interaction with married partners and clients, would there be any concerns about professional boundaries that we should be aware of? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. You might want to speak with the partners directly about any specific concerns, she finally said. I can provide you with the contact information for our managing partner. 20 minutes later, I was speaking with Marcus Wellington, the managing partner at Henderson & Associates, who was far less constrained by human resource protocols. Zoe Mitchell was terminated for gross misconduct involving an inappropriate relationship with a married partner. The relationship caused significant disruption to our workplace, resulted in a sexual harassment claim from another employee, and ultimately cost us 2 major clients. We had to pay a substantial settlement to avoid litigation.
Did she admit to the relationship? I asked. Initially, she denied everything and claimed she was being harassed by the partner in question. It wasn't until we obtained hotel receipts and email evidence that she changed her story. Even then, she maintained that she was the victim of manipulation by an older, more powerful man. The pattern was becoming clear. Zoe's strategy was always to position herself as the innocent victim, manipulated by powerful men who took advantage of her youth and naivete. It had worked at Henderson & Associates long enough for her to secure a settlement. Now she was trying the same approach with David and me. But this time, I had documentation of her active participation in the conspiracy. My third call was to Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the opposing counsel David had mentioned in his fabricated work stories. Dr. Hendricks, this is Rachel Hartwell. I believe my husband, David Hartwell, has been working on a case with you as opposing counsel. I'm trying to coordinate some scheduling and wondered if you could tell me about the current status of depositions. I'm sorry, Dr. Hendricks replied, clearly confused. I don't believe I've ever worked with anyone named David Hartwell. Are you sure you have the right attorney? Another piece of David's elaborate fiction crumbled. Every detail of his cover story, every specific name and legal procedure he had mentioned was proving to be fabricated. But the most devastating evidence came from an unexpected source.
David himself. That evening, he arrived home later than usual, looking haggard and distracted. Over dinner, I decided to test just how deep his deception ran. "How did the depositions go today?" I asked casually. "Brutal," he replied automatically. "Patricia Hendricks was being deliberately obstructive about document production. We might have to file a motion to compel." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds frustrating. What kind of documents is she withholding?" For just a moment, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Financial records, mostly. Bank statements, corporate filings, the usual discovery materials." "From the Morrison case?" "Right, the Morrison case." He took a large bite, buying himself time to think. "I actually called Dr. Hendricks today," I said quietly. David's fork clattered against his plate. "You what?" "I called her office. I wanted to see if we could arrange a time to meet. You know, professional courtesy between spouses. She seemed very confused when I mentioned your name." The color drained from David's face. "Rachel, you can't just call opposing counsel. That's completely inappropriate. It could jeopardize the entire case." "What case, David?" I asked, my voice still calm and reasonable. "Dr. Hendricks has never heard of you. Your assistant confirmed that you haven't had any evening or weekend depositions in 6 months. The Morrison case doesn't exist." He stared at me across the table, his mind visibly racing through possible explanations. "You're misunderstanding something. Maybe you talked to the wrong Patricia Hendricks. Maybe my assistant is confused about the scheduling." "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe you've been lying to me for 8 months about where you spend your evenings." David set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "Rachel, I think you're having some kind of episode. This paranoid thinking, these conspiracy theories about my work. Maybe you should talk to someone." There it was, the gaslighting strategy deployed exactly as they had planned in their emails. Make me question my own perception of reality, make me seem unstable and paranoid. "I'm not having an episode, David. I'm having a moment of clarity." I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery. "Would you like to see the credit card statements for the account you opened 8 months ago? The one with charges for dinner at Chez Laurent on March 15th, when you told me you were working late on depositions?" His face went completely white. "Or maybe you'd prefer to discuss the emails between you and Zoe, where you plan to use my career advancement against me in divorce proceedings." David's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. Finally, he managed, I don't know what you think you found, but I found everything, David. Every email, every receipt, every lie you've told me for the past 8 months. I know about the fake Morrison case. I know about your plan to portray our marriage as broken before you met Zoe. I know about her phone call to me, which was not a spontaneous confession, but a calculated move to make me react emotionally. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady and controlled. I also know about Zoe's employment history, about why she was really fired from Henderson and Associates, about the fact that you deliberately hired someone with a history of inappropriate workplace relationships. He slumped in his chair, the fight visibly draining out of him. "How long have you known?" "Does it matter? The question is, what happens now?" "Rachel, I can explain." "No, you can't, because every explanation you might offer will be another lie, and I already have the truth documented in your own words. The only question now is whether you want to handle this quietly and reasonably, or whether you want me to file complaints with the State Bar Association and pursue fraud charges." The mention of the State Bar Association made him flinch visibly. His career, his reputation, his professional standing, everything he had been trying to protect by destroying me quietly was now hanging by a thread. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want you to call Zoe right now and tell her that your marriage counselor has suggested a trial separation to work on communication issues. I want you to sleep in the guest room tonight. And tomorrow morning, I want you to pack enough clothes for a week and check into a hotel." And then what? Then we see how committed she really is when you're not the successful attorney with the perfect exit strategy anymore. We see how much she loves you when you're the married man whose wife just found out about the affair.
David reached for his phone with shaking hands. As he dialed Zoe's number, I wondered if he was finally beginning to understand what I had realized days ago. He hadn't been playing chess with two naive women. He had been playing chess with one naive woman and one very smart woman who had been pretending to be naive while documenting his every move. And now the game was over. "Zoe," he said when she answered, "we need to talk. There's been a complication." I smiled as I listened to him try to explain to his co-conspirator that their carefully constructed plan had just collapsed. Because the most devastating evidence of all wasn't the credit card statements or the emails or even the professional misconduct. The most devastating evidence was watching David realize that he had been completely outmaneuvered by the woman he had spent months systematically underestimating. 3 days later, I sat in Jennifer Walsh's conference room watching David's attorney, Robert Chen, shuffle through documents with the grim expression of a man who knew his client had walked into a minefield blindfolded. "My client maintains that these allegations are exaggerated," Chen said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. "The relationship with Miss Mitchell began after marital difficulties had already created an irreparable breakdown in the marriage." Jennifer didn't even look up from her notes. "Your client documented his plan to create evidence of marital breakdown. We have emails showing premeditation dating back 10 months. We also have proof that the professional obligations he cited as causing marital stress were entirely fabricated." She slid a folder across the table. "We've subpoenaed records from his law firm confirming that no Morrison case exists. We have statements from the supposed opposing counsel confirming she's never worked with your client. We have testimony from his assistant confirming that he hasn't had evening or weekend depositions in over 6 months." Chen opened the folder and his face grew progressively paler as he reviewed the contents. "This is extensive. It gets worse," Jennifer continued smoothly. "We've also filed a complaint with the State Bar Association regarding your client's deliberate hiring of Ms. Mitchell despite her history of inappropriate workplace relationships. The pattern suggests professional misconduct that could result in license suspension." "You can't prove he knew about her employment history when he hired her," Chen protested weakly. "Actually, we can." Jennifer pulled out another document. "Ms. Mitchell's termination from Henderson and Associates was part of a sexual harassment settlement that became public record. Any competent background check would have revealed it. Either your client failed to perform due diligence when hiring someone for a position requiring professional integrity, or he deliberately hired someone with a history of workplace affairs while being married himself." I watched David shrink in his chair as the full scope of his legal exposure became clear. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. His professional reputation, his license to practice law, and his financial future were all on the line. "There's also the matter of the fraudulent financial documentation. Your client opened a credit card account and used marital assets to fund an extramarital relationship while lying to his spouse about the nature of those expenditures. That constitutes financial fraud." Chen looked at David, who had gone completely pale. "Perhaps we should discuss a settlement. We're open to reasonable terms. Full financial disclosure, including all hidden accounts and assets, equitable division of marital property based on actual contributions rather than your client's fictional narrative, spousal support appropriate to the level of financial deception involved." "And the professional complaints?" Jennifer glanced at me. We had discussed this moment extensively. "It depends on how cooperative your client wants to be." David finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want me to do?" "Tell the truth," I said. "All of it. On the record, about the fake case, about the planned manipulation, about deliberately hiring Zoe despite her history. Sign an affidavit acknowledging that you systematically deceived me about your whereabouts and expenditures for 10 months. And if I do that, then we consider the professional complaints as resolved between parties, assuming you make full restitution for the fraudulent charges and accept responsibility for the deception." David looked at his attorney, who nodded grimly. "It's the best offer you're going to get, David. The alternative is a public hearing where all of this becomes part of the court record." "What about Zoe?" That question revealed everything I needed to know about his character. Even facing professional ruin, he was still trying to protect his co-conspirator. Miss Mitchell will face the consequences of her own actions, though I suspect her current employer will be very interested in learning about her history once these proceedings become public. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Zoe. "We need to talk. David told me what happened. This is all his fault. I have information that could help you."
I showed the message to Jennifer, who smiled coldly. How predictable. The conspiracy is dissolving exactly as we expected. I typed back a simple response. My attorney will contact you to schedule a deposition. Within an hour, Zoe had sent 3 more messages, each one more desperate than the last. She wanted to meet in person. She had evidence that David had manipulated her. She was just a victim of his psychological abuse. I didn't respond to any of them. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later in the form of signed settlement documents. David agreed to give me the house, 70% of our joint assets, and substantial spousal support for 3 years. He acknowledged in writing that he had systematically deceived me about his whereabouts and expenditures, that he had fabricated professional obligations to cover an extramarital affair, and that he had planned to use false evidence in divorce proceedings. Most importantly, he agreed to a non-disclosure clause that prevented him from publicly discussing our marriage or the circumstances of our divorce. Zoe, meanwhile, had been terminated from David's law firm after the partners learned about the affair and her employment history. Her desperate attempts to shift blame onto David had backfired spectacularly when Jennifer's investigation revealed the extent of her active participation in the conspiracy. The woman who had called me at 2 a.m. to tell me I was the other woman in my own marriage was now unemployed, facing potential legal action from her former employers, and discovering that David was far less interested in their relationship when it cost him everything instead of giving him an easy exit. On the day our divorce was finalized, I received one last message from Zoe. "You destroyed everything. I hope you're happy." I was. Not because I had destroyed their lives, but because I had refused to let them destroy mine. Not because I had gotten revenge, but because I had gotten justice. 6 months after that devastating phone call that had shattered my world, I was sitting in my own house, my house now, with a cup of coffee and a real estate listing for a condo in downtown Portland. I had accepted a position as head nurse at a prestigious hospital there, a job that represented not just a fresh start, but a recognition of the professional competence that David and Zoe had tried to use against me. The woman who had once questioned her own sanity when confronted with obvious lies was gone. In her place was someone who trusted her instincts, documented her worth, and refused to accept gaslighting disguised as love. I thought about the other women who might be sitting in dark living rooms at 2 a.m., wondering if they were losing their minds. Women who were being told they were paranoid for noticing inconsistencies, dramatic for questioning obvious lies, controlling for wanting honesty from their partners. The evidence was always there. The bank statements, the phone records, the work schedules that didn't match the stories. The key was learning to trust yourself enough to look for it and strong enough to act on what you found. As I sealed the envelope containing my resignation letter from Maplewood General Hospital, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete control over my own narrative. David and Zoe had tried to rewrite my story to make themselves the heroes and me the villain. They failed, because the truth, when properly documented and strategically revealed, is more powerful than any fiction. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's proving that you were never as naive as they thought you were. And sometimes the woman they try to gaslight is actually the woman who's been paying attention all along.